Alden and Faye are both 34. They both have exactly $50,000 invested. On the same Tuesday night in two different kitchens, they opened the same spreadsheet because they watched the same video promising the same thing: retire in 10 years. On Faye's table, next to her laptop, sits her husband's laptop. On Alden's, next to his, sits a pizza box he uses as a mouse pad. 10 years later, Faye is 44 and she doesn't work. Alden is 44 and he does. It wasn't discipline. Alden never missed a contribution. It wasn't the market they held the same fund. It wasn't fees. It wasn't luck. And it wasn't the $50,000, which was identical to the dollar. The thing that separated them was sitting on the table the whole time. And it had a salary. And the thing that almost stopped Faye was a bill neither had ever seen, one that doesn't arrive until the day you quit. My name is Nick, and today we're running the real math on retiring in 10 years with $50,000. If you've ever opened a compound interest calculator at midnight, felt a real surge of hope, and then closed the laptop feeling somehow worse than before you opened it, hit subscribe. This is the video where we find out why that keeps happening. And let me be crystal clear. I'm not a financial advisor, this isn't financial advice, and I have no 10-step system to sell you. I have a calculator and an unhealthy amount of free time. Two numbers are going to run this entire video, so let's agree on them now and never argue about them again. 7% is the fantasy, 5% is the plan. Everything else you hear today is one of those two wearing a costume. And here's the promise on the table: $50,000. 10 years. Freedom, most people covering this will tell you it's a scam. It isn't. The math works. It is verifiably arithmetically true. The math just doesn't work for most of the people it's being sold to. Those are two different sentences, and the gap between them is where people lose a decade. So let's start with the seductive part. You've got $50,000, you're 34, you put it in a total market index fund and don't touch it for 10 years. At 7%, the fantasy number, it becomes about $98,000. It doubled. And it is nowhere close to enough to retire on. It's not enough to retire on for 1 year. So the seed money was never the plan, it's the deposit. The plan is what you shovel on top every month for 120 consecutive months. Faye and her husband bring in about $240,000 combined. After taxes and after a mortgage they deliberately kept boring, Faye can move $5,000 a month without it feeling like surgery. Faye is the $5,000 line. Alden makes $95,000 a year. By national standards, Alden is doing extremely well. On a good month, Alden can move about $1,200. Alden is the $1,200 line. Watch what those two lines do over 10 years, starting from the identical $50,000. At $1,000 a month, you finish with about $271,000. At $3,000 a month, $618,000. And at $5,000 a month, every month for 10 straight years, you cross the line. $963,000. Call it $1 million. That's Faye. That's the thumbnail. That's the guy on your feed standing in front of a rented Porsche telling you it's simple, and the uncomfortable part is that he isn't lying. It is simple, but look at what just happened inside Faye's numbers, because this is the thing I really want you to see. Her original $50,000 grew into $98,000 of that final balance, out of $963,000. That's 10% of the outcome. 90% of her retirement is money she hadn't earned yet on the night she opened that spreadsheet. The $50,000 in the title of this video is the least important number in the entire equation. The actual engine, the thing doing 90% of the work, is her ability to shovel $60,000 a year into the market while continuing to exist as a person. Which brings us to the part nobody puts on the thumbnail. Not because it's complicated, because it's rude. $60,000 a year is not a savings rate. $60,000 a year is a salary. You could hire a full-time, median-wage American worker, pay them properly, and give them benefits using nothing but the money this plan expects you to have lying around unused. Median household income in the United States is about $83,700 a year. That's the census figure, and it's essentially flat against 2019, which is its own separate video and frankly its own separate rage. $83,700 before taxes. So saving $60,000 would be 72% of that household's entire gross income, not their spending money, their income. Before the government, before rent, before the child who inexplicably needs new shoes every 4 months. Now I know exactly what some of you are typing right now. Nick, you're being dramatic. I'll just cut expenses. Okay, let's cut them. All of them. That median household takes home somewhere around $68,000 after taxes. Subtract the $60,000 you're saving, and you are running your entire life, housing included, on about $660 a month. That's not frugality, that's a hostage situation, and you'd have to hold yourself hostage for 120 consecutive months. And notice the word I keep using, median, not average. Plant a flag here, because this one distinction will protect you from more financial nonsense than anything else you learn today. Put 9 people with nothing in a room with one billionaire. The average net worth in that room is $100 million. 10 people. Not one of them has $100 million. That is what an average is. Vanguard's most recent report puts the average 401k balance around $168,000, and you hear that and think, okay, we're all a little behind, but we're in the game. The median, the actual middle person standing at the exact center of the line, is about $44,000. And that gap isn't statistical noise. That gap is a small number of enormous accounts standing on a very tall ladder, dragging the average so far up that it stops describing anybody who exists. When somebody quotes you an average in personal finance, they are usually quoting you a number that belongs to no living human being. Here's the part that should change how you feel about yourself for a second. According to Federal Reserve data, the median retirement balance for Americans between 35 and 44 is around $45,000. So if you're sitting there at 34 with $50,000, feeling late, feeling like everybody else got a head start you missed, you're not behind, you're winning, you are statistically ahead of the middle of your entire generation, which feels fantastic for about 4 seconds until you understand what it actually means. The middle of your generation is nowhere near retirement, and being ahead of nowhere is, geographically speaking, still pretty close to nowhere. So Alden is going to lose this race. I want to be honest with you about that now rather than pretend otherwise for 15 minutes. Stay with me anyway. Because Alden loses the race and still wins the video, and I'll show you exactly how at the end. But first, Faye, because Faye made it, and I need to tell you that the finish line moves. Let's say you're her. You've got your $1 million. How much can you pull out every year without running out of money before you run out of life? Everyone knows the answer. 4%. $40,000 a year forever. Keep this one in a separate pocket from the 7 and the 5. Those are how fast the money grows. This is how fast you're allowed to spend it. It comes from William Bengen, who in 1994 ran every 30-year retirement window in modern American history and found 4.15% was the highest withdrawal rate that survived all of them, including the worst one. Great work. One problem. It was built for a 30-year retirement. You're retiring at 44. If you live to 90, which is the entire point of retiring early, that you are alive for it, then you're not funding 30 years. You're funding 46. You've taken a rule that was stress tested for a marathon and you're using it to plan an expedition. Morningstar runs this same calculation every year, looking forward instead of backward, factoring in what stocks and bonds actually cost today. Their current number for a 30-year retirement is 3.9%. Not 46 years. 3.9% of $1 million is $39,000 a year. Before taxes. Before health insurance. For the rest of your natural life. Congratulations, you did the impossible thing. You saved $1 million in a decade, and your prize is a budget that would make a public school teacher nervous. And that's the good scenario. That's if the market cooperates. Which brings me to Dave. Dave is the third person in this story, and Dave is the one who keeps me up at night. Dave ran the same spreadsheet as everyone else, except Dave used 10%, because 10% is the historical average return of the S&P 500. Dave isn't stupid, that's a real number, it just describes the past. Here's what the people paid to forecast the future are saying about the next 10 years, which is conveniently the exact length of your plan. Vanguard's model puts American stock returns between 3.5% and 5.5% a year. Goldman Sachs published roughly 3%, BlackRock is in the fives, JP Morgan is the optimist in the room at about 6.7. Nobody is at 10. Nobody is anywhere near 10. And the reason is boring. Stocks are expensive. The Shiller-Cape ratio, which is basically the market's price divided by a decade of smoothed out earnings, is sitting around 41. The only time in roughly 140 years it was meaningfully higher was late 1999, and I'll let you look up what happened next on your own time. So Dave puts in $3,000 a month for 10 years. At 10%, he ends up with $750,000. At 4%, $516,000. But here's the part that matters, and it isn't the subtraction. Dave doesn't find out in year 1, he finds out in year 9. He's 43, there's a sticky note on his monitor, and the number on it has been $750,000 for 9 years. It survived 2 job changes and a move. He has said no to things because of that sticky note. And one morning he opens the account the way he has 1,000 times, and it says 516,000. There is no version of the next 12 months in which Dave makes up $234,000. He automated. He indexed. He didn't panic sell in the crash. The market simply handed him a different decade than the one on the sticky note. And then the internet told him he must not have wanted it badly enough. Now, in fairness, these forecasters have been wrong before. They've predicted mediocre returns for over a decade, and for over a decade, American stocks went up anyway and made every one of those models look ridiculous. Mean reversion is a beautiful theory that keeps missing its train. So maybe AI eats the world, we get another roaring decade and Dave dies rich and smug, but building a 10-year plan on a 10% assumption isn't investing. It's betting that the least likely outcome is the guaranteed one. And you don't find out you were wrong until year 9 when there's no time left to fix it. Now, before we get to the bill I promised you, I want to talk about what these 10 years actually feel like. Because nobody films this part. Alden is 6 years in. And year 6 doesn't feel like a spreadsheet. Year 6 feels like doing math in your car outside a restaurant before you go in. It feels like your closest friend getting married in Portugal and you telling everybody you couldn't get the time off, which is not the reason. It feels like your one working car making a new noise on the highway, and what you feel isn't annoyance, it's something closer to dread, because the emergency fund is load-bearing now. It feels like being 39 and explaining to your mother one more time why you're still renting. It feels like being the most responsible person you know and the most tired person you know at the same time. For 6 more years, while nobody claps. That is the actual price of admission. Not the $60,000. That part's just arithmetic. This part is the cost, and here is what's waiting at the end of it. You retire at 44. You are now 21 years away from Medicare. 21 years of buying your own health insurance on the open market as a person with no employer, no group plan, and by design, almost no income. At the start of 2026, the enhanced subsidies holding down Affordable Care Act premiums expired. Net premiums for millions of people roughly doubled. The average benchmark plan now runs north of $600 a month, and the subsidy cliff came back, which means that above a certain income, roughly $84,000 for a couple, you don't get a smaller subsidy. You get nothing. $1 over the line, and a household can go from heavily subsidized to $22,000 a year in premiums. $22,000. That is not a line item. That's a mortgage. That's the bill. That's the one that was never in either spreadsheet. It doesn't arrive on the day you retire. It arrives on the day you tell your boss. Faye has $1 million and she is allowed to spend $39,000 of it a year. 22 of those thousands can go to a health insurance company before she has bought a single thing that makes a life worth retiring into. She did everything right, and she is still negotiating with an insurer for permission to be free. I call it the leash. And I want you to look at how it's built, because it did not happen by accident. Your employer buys your health insurance with pre-tax dollars. A benefit worth thousands a year, that vaporizes the instant you go buy it yourself. So ask the only question that matters. Who benefits? Your employer benefits from a workforce that cannot leave. Insurers benefit from captive customers who never shop. And the subsidy cliff, almost poetically, punishes the exact income band most likely to attempt early retirement while leaving the very rich who can self-insure completely untouched. Nobody in that room profits from you being free. That's not a conspiracy. Nobody sat in a boardroom and designed the leash. It's worse than that. It's that every single participant had a reason to build their piece of it, and not one of them had a reason to build the exit. So when you stay another year at a job you have outgrown because of the insurance, understand what that is. That is not a failure of nerve. That is the machine working exactly as intended. You're not being irrational. You're being contained. And this is exactly the kind of thing that's easier to work through with other people running the same numbers than it is alone at midnight with a calculator and a rising sense of doom. That's why I built a school community. The link's in the description, and it's where people post the real spreadsheets, the real premium quotes, and the real. Here's what happened when I stress tested my plan and it fell apart. Come argue with me about it, I'd prefer it. Okay, so what actually works? First, the money is not locked up. This is the most common reason people quit before they start. I can't touch it until I'm 59 and a half. Yes, you can. There's the Roth conversion ladder, where you convert retirement money to Roth in your low-income early retirement years, wait 5 years, and pull it out penalty-free. There's the rule of 55. And there's 72T, officially substantially equal periodic payments, which sounds less like a legal escape hatch and more like something you'd be diagnosed with. Look all three up. They're real, they're legal, and the only thing guarding them is that the paperwork is boring enough to work as a security system. Second, fill the tax advantage buckets first. In 2026, you can put $24,500 into a 401k, $7,500 into an IRA, and $4,400 or $8,750 for a family into a health savings account. The HSA is the only account in the tax code that's tax-free going in, tax-free growing, and tax-free coming out, which is either a drafting error or an act of mercy, and I've stopped asking. You just learned healthcare is the thing that kills these plans. The HSA isn't an investment account, it's the antidote. Third, take the entire employer match. All of it. It's the only guaranteed 100% return available to a private citizen, and people lose it every year because on day one of a new job, the enrollment form was the fourth most interesting thing on the desk. But none of those is the biggest lever. The biggest lever is the one nobody wants to hear. It's income. Over 10 years, a $20,000 raise you refuse to spend beats every spending cut you will ever make. Spending cuts hit a floor. Income doesn't. There's a bottom to how little you can pay for groceries. There is no ceiling on what you can earn. And I know how that sounds. Just make more money is the kind of advice that makes people want to throw a laptop across a room, but it's the true answer. The reason the internet would rather talk about lattes is that a latte is a problem you solve on a Tuesday afternoon, and income is a problem you solve over years. One of those makes a better video, the other one makes you money. Which brings us back to Alden, $95,000 a year, $1,200 a month. Alden is not retiring in 10 years, and no spreadsheet on earth is going to change that. Here's what he gets instead. Age 34, $50,000. $1,200 a month for 10 years. And we're using 5%, the plan, not 7, the fantasy, because I refuse to spend a whole video arguing against optimistic numbers and then quietly use one when it's convenient. At 44, Alden has about $237,000, and now he stops. He never contributes another dollar, he leaves it completely alone. By 60, that money is worth roughly $630,000 in today's money. Alden didn't retire at 44. Alden did something more achievable and, I'd argue, more useful. At 44, Alden finished. He is done saving for retirement. Permanently, every dollar from that morning forward belongs to the life he's actually living. The house, the kid, the trip, the year off. The career change he was too frightened to make back when his old age depended on his next paycheck. That's called Coast Fire. And it's the version of this plan available to a normal person with a normal job in a normal decade. Faye bought a finish line, Alden bought a floor. And it turns out that a floor is the thing that lets you take risks. So, can you retire in 10 years starting with $50,000? Yes, if you can save about $5,000 a month, which means earning around $200,000 a year, which means you probably didn't need this video. And that's the joke at the center of nearly all financial content on the internet. It's written for people who already won and watched by people who haven't. But the machine underneath it, the automatic contributions, the index funds, the tax-advantaged accounts, the ruthless refusal to spend a raise, that machine runs at every income. It just pays out differently. At $240,000 a year, it buys you a decade of your life back. At $95,000 a year, it buys you the end of financial fear by 44, which is not a consolation prize. That is most of what people are actually chasing when they say they want to retire early. They don't want to stop working. They want to stop being afraid. So here's the question I'd actually ask, and it's the one I want to watch you fight about over in our school community Forget the Number. If you never had to save another dollar for retirement, if the future were already funded and every paycheck from here on out was purely yours, what would you do on Monday? Because the honest answer to that is worth considerably more than $50,000. And unlike the $50,000, you already have it.